Welcome to the Men of Warrior 22 show. I am your host, Alex Bonilla. Welcome, everybody. All right, we're getting into it. Well, I'm going to start this off with a very simple question. Have you ever ignored a red flag knowing it was a red flag, but convincing yourself that it wasn't? And it's not because you didn't see it, but because you wanted the relationship to work. Maybe because you loved them, because you didn't want to start over, because you kept believing. Maybe you kept believing it'll get better. If you've ever been there, then tonight's conversation is for you. Again, welcome everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining, everybody. Welcome to the Men of Warrior 22 show again. I am your host, Alex Bonilla. Whether you're joining live on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube, or maybe catching the replay later, I truly appreciate you spending part of your evening with me. If you're here live, then please drop in the comment section where you're tuning in from, what state. Give me the thumbs up or a thumbs down on how we're doing tonight. And if this is your first time, welcome. I'm glad you're here. So, if you've never watched the Men of Warrior 22 show before, then let me tell you what this community is about. This isn't a place where we pretend we have all the answers. It's not about judging people. It's not about telling you how to live your life. This is a place where we're going to have honest conversations about mental health, relationships, resilience, healing, and the invisible battles that so many people fight every day. Because here's what I learned. People don't need another lecture. They need a place where they can feel understood. A place where they can ask these difficult questions, right? A place where they realize they're not the only ones who've felt this way. And that's what Men of Warrior 22 has always been about. Helping people realize that healing begins with these honest conversations and that no one has to walk through life's battles alone. So again, welcome everyone in the comment sections. Danielle, Genesis, Trina, Natasha, Matt, welcome. Misty, welcome, Misty. So over the last couple of weeks, for the month of July, we've been discussing relationships, right? From a mental health aspect. And we started by asking, what are you settling for because you're lonely? Last week, we asked, are you loving them or are you trying to save them? And those conversations weren't really about just relationships, right? They really weren't. I wanted to approach it from a different perspective, right? Those were about us because relationships have a way of revealing parts of ourselves that still need healing. And tonight, it's going to be no different. Tonight, we're going to go just a little bit more with that. We're going to have that conversation. I want you to think about someone you've looked back on. Maybe it was someone you dated. Maybe it was a friendship. Maybe it was someone in your own family. And looking back now, everything seems obvious, right? Everything seems obvious now. The inconsistencies, the broken promises, the excuses, the manipulation, that feeling that something just wasn't right. You can see it now, right? It's after the fact. So the question isn't, how did I miss it? I think that the better question is, why did I keep explaining it away? Something I want you to think about. It's not how did I miss it? It's why do I keep explaining it away? Because I don't believe most people miss the red flags. I think most of us see them. Most of us see the red flags, but we spend a lot of our time talking ourselves out of what we already know. We tell ourselves they're just stressed. Um, they've been hurt before. Nobody's perfect. Maybe I'm just expecting too much, or maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe if I love them a little bit more, things might change. Does any of that sound familiar? Yes, absolutely. Love goggles. Those things are dangerous. I agree. I agree. But we tend to explain those things. We tend to justify and make those excuses for those things, right? But the truth is, we are incredibly good at making excuses for people we don't want to lose. We make a lot of excuses for people we don't want to lose. Lori, because if you face it, it can hurt. Or did I do the best I could? Yes. Yes. And we internalize those things, right? And it's not because we're weak, not because you are naive, right? We tend to beat ourselves up about that. But I think because sometimes our fear becomes louder than the intuition, right? That inner voice in your gut telling you. So tonight isn't about labeling other people. Tonight isn't about creating a checklist of who's toxic in your life and who isn't. Tonight is about something more important. Why do we ignore what our intuition has been trying to tell us? Why do we convince ourselves that unhealthy has become normal? Why do we stay in situations that slowly is chipping away at our peace? And what does that reveal about parts of ourselves that still need healing? So, throughout tonight's conversation, I'd love for you guys to be a part of it. If you're comfortable, then you can tell us what's one red flag you've ignored that looking back, you wish you had paid more attention to. You don't have to drop names, you don't have to finger point. Just it's just lessons, right? Because somebody watching tonight may need to hear your story. So, what is one red flag you ignored that looking back now, you wish you would have paid more attention to? You wish you didn't continue to explain away and justify for them. And this doesn't have to be on a romantic level. No, this is a relationship with family, friends, a loved one, just with anybody. You see the red flags, sometimes even when you meet people that are your friends. So I want to leave you with this one question for a moment that I hope stays with you throughout the rest of the hour. What if the biggest red flag in your life weren't the ones you didn't see? What if it were the ones you kept explaining away? And that's what we're diving into. What if the biggest red flags in your life weren't the ones you didn't see, but the ones you kept explaining away? Trina, emotional connection that disappeared. Natasha, family who were emotionally unavailable. I think that is, again, like we live in an age where we are so connected through social media, all these electronics, all these ways, but yet we are so disconnected from each other. Misty, lack of communication. Maybe they're just busy. If I'm patient enough, they'll come around. I agree. I agree. And I want to start by clearing up a misconception. When people leave unhealthy relationships, one of the first things that they hear is, "How did I not see it?" Or, "I would have never put up with that." I saw it from the beginning, right? These are the things that you'll hear from people, right? The outside voice and the people, your friends, your family, they'll tell you those things like, how did you not see it? I would have never dealt with that. I don't know why you stood around this long. I saw that from the beginning. Maybe even you said those words to someone at some point. But again, here's what I've learned. Most people don't ignore the red flags because they're blind. They ignore them because they have a reason to, and I'm not saying the reason is healthy. I'm not saying it is healthy, but it's real. Heather, he is married, but he really doesn't want to be with her. Yes, yes. Or the other way around, right? Like the, that's when the man is married, but he doesn't want to be with her. Or when she claims, oh, we're going through a divorce, but we sleep in separate bedrooms. We're still in the same house. There's a lot of red flags, but we justify, and again, I'm not saying these reasons are healthy, but they're real reasons, so think about it. Have you ever been driving somewhere, maybe driven 100 times? You get home and you realize you don't even remember the drive. You stopped at the lights, you turned where you needed to turn, you avoided the other cars, like your brain was on autopilot. Relationships can be the same way. Sometimes you're not responding to what's actually happening. You're responding to old experiences, the old wounds, the old fears, the old beliefs. And before you know it, you're on autopilot. And I've said this before, we often don't see people as they are. We see them through the lens of our experiences. If you grew up feeling like love had to be earned, then you may make the mistake of inconsistency for something you need to work harder to fix. If you grew up believing conflict meant abandonment, then you might avoid difficult conversations just to keep someone from leaving. If you spent your life trying to make everyone happy, then you'll ignore your own needs just to keep the peace. It's the same relationship, different life experiences, different interpretation. So I think about another reason we miss them. We miss the red flags is because we're expecting them to be dramatic. We think the red flags might look like cheating, right? It might look like screaming. It might look like emotional, physical abuse. Sometimes they do. Sometimes those red flags are so obvious, right? And I think that when those red flags are that obvious, you pick up on them. But sometimes they're subtle. They don't, they don't celebrate your wins. Sometimes they disappear every time you need them. They apologize, but nothing ever changes. You always leave conversations feeling like somehow everything's your fault. They only put effort into the relationship when they're afraid of losing you. None of those things happen overnight. They happen little by little, almost so slowly that you adapt to them. And that's dangerous because what you repeatedly tolerate eventually is going to start to feel normal. Natasha, that is powerful. We don't love or see people for who they are, but from our experiences. Absolutely. So you probably heard the story about the frog in the boiling water, right? The story of the frog in boiling water. If you throw the frog in boiling water, it jumps out immediately, right? But if the temperature slowly rises, the frog doesn't notice that it's getting hot until it's too late. Now, whether that story is Whether it's accurate or not, doesn't matter. That's not the point. The lesson is that most unhealthy relationships don't start unhealthy. It begins almost like, if they did, almost nobody's going to stay. You're not going to stick around. The manipulation, the emotional distance, the criticism, the control, that increases over time, little by little, conversation by conversation, boundary by boundary. Deborah, healing from being unloved, a failed toxic relationship, an addiction, etc. The hardest thing we had to do sometimes is change our playmates and playgrounds, especially when we see the red flags. Absolutely. Heather, love bombing, narcissistic traits. Yes. Hey, Tisha. So what do? We become experts at making excuses. Again, going back to what I said from the beginning, they're stressed. It's just that work has been hard. They didn't mean it. They had a rough childhood. They're going to change. They're trying. Nobody's perfect. Now, let me say something. Having empathy is an amazing thing. You can have empathy, right? Understanding why someone behaves the way that they do is important. And you can have all the love and empathy towards someone, right? But understanding someone's pain does not require sacrificing your peace. Understand that. By understanding someone's pain and having empathy doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice your peace. You can understand someone's trauma without allowing it to become yours. So again, I'd love to hear from you guys. Have you ever looked back and realized I wasn't ignoring the red flags? I actually was explaining them away. What was the excuse you kept making? Again, no names. This is just lessons. What was the excuse you kept making? And it doesn't have to be a romantic partner, just towards the red flags you saw in someone or even a family member, right? Because some of us unfortunately grew up with parents who weren't the perfect parents, weren't there. The red flags were all over the place, right? The manipulation. And even as an adult, you often hear people tell you, like, listen, you got to forgive her. That's your mom. You only have one mom. Or you have to forgive him. That's your dad. Making you feel worse about yourself for what they did. And the red flags were there. And as a kid, those red flags are there, but you keep hoping, oh, she's just stressed. He's just stressed, but I know he loves me. If I keep doing this, they're going to love me. A lot of times we make those excuses and it becomes the norm. And we transfer that into relationships when we get older. Heather, find peace within yourself first. Self-love, self-care, boundaries. Absolutely. Trina, this will change. Just leave it alone. I've heard that one a lot. The interesting part is most of us, we don't wake up one day and decide, I'm going to ignore every warning sign. There's something much deeper happening beneath that surface. Eli, I was the red flag. I wanted to love her like I wanted to be loved instead of loving her like she should have been loved. Learned this in my 40s. Eli, I appreciate you sharing that. There's so much of that I can agree with, that I felt on so many levels. I think that understanding and recognizing that within yourself, especially, I mean, that's huge. That's huge because it's easy for us to blame everyone else as well. And sometimes you have to understand and take accountability for the role you may have played. Right. So I appreciate that, Eli. So let's talk about that. There's something much deeper happening beneath the surface. The way we were raised, the relationships we may have witnessed, the fears, the beliefs that we developed about love, those things shape what feels normal to us. So I want to dive a little deeper into like the psychology behind why some people stay in these unhealthy relationships. Dakota, what's going on, brother? Thank you. Why do people stay in these unhealthy relationships even when they know something doesn't feel right? Something does not feel right. So, how many of you have ever looked back at a relationship and said, damn, I knew something wasn't right. I could have just walked away. Maybe that's you tonight. Maybe you've been wondering what's wrong with me. Why do I keep choosing that same kind of person? Why do I always end up hurt? Here's what I want you to hear. First, there's nothing wrong with you. But there may be something in you that still needs healing. Because every one of us enters a relationship carrying something. We all go into a relationship carrying something. And the older we get, the more we're carrying, right? Because life experiences. Some of us are carrying confidence, some carry trust, but some carry the fear, some carry these childhood wounds, the abandonment. Some carry the belief that if you love someone enough, then they'll finally love you back, right? Nicole, facing accountability regarding knowledge of all the flags. Heather, self-sabotage. Absolutely. So I've said this before. Nobody hands us an instruction manual to relationships, right? We're all learning as we go, right? We learn by watching. We learn from our parents, our grandparents, our first heartbreak, our first betrayal, the people maybe who raised us, the people who hurt us, the people who protected us. Whether those lessons were healthy or unhealthy, they became our normal. So if you grew up in a home where yelling was normal, that peace might feel uncomfortable, right? If affection was inconsistent, then you're going to confuse that unpredictability with passion. If love always had conditions, you might spend your adult life trying to earn it. And one of the biggest lies we tell ourselves is, this just feels familiar. Exactly. That's the problem. This just feels familiar. Our brains are designed to seek what's familiar, not necessarily what's healthy. Your brain's not seeking what's healthy, just what's familiar, the patterns, right? Sometimes peace feels boring because the chaos is always what we've known. So sometimes consistency feels suspicious because we've always expected people to leave, right? So if someone is around and they're being nice, they're showing you something, and you're not used to that, you kind of side eye them like, what do you want? What do you need? Who sent you? Sometimes healthy love feels uncomfortable because you're waiting for something to go wrong. And think about that. How many relationships have we sabotaged? Not because they were unhealthy, but because they were unfamiliar. Eli, the toughest thing to do was intentionally doing something different. I agree. I agree. It is the toughest. And sometimes it requires you to step out of your comfort zone. Leanne, people being nice to me always makes me suspicious. Like, what do you want in return? I agree. I agree. That's, it doesn't matter what it is. And it's something I probably still struggle with to this day sometimes. And I've gotten better. But if someone compliments me, I'm like, mm, what do you need? What's going on? That's just my natural reaction. I'm not saying it's healthy. It's just that's how it is with life experiences. A lot of things happen, right? And I think one of the biggest reasons we ignore the warning signs is fear, right? Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of hurting someone, of disappointing our family, fear that maybe this is the best we'll ever find, right? So fear has a funny way of negotiating with reality. Instead of listening to our gut, instead of listening to our intuition, we start bargaining, right? Again, maybe it'll get better. Maybe I expect too much. Maybe it's just me, right? Maybe this is just relationships. That's how it is the norm. Because again, going back, this is how we were raised, what we know. But no, it's not. Sometimes your gut is trying to protect you. Sometimes you need to listen to that. So, Heather, insecurities, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, so this might be uncomfortable to hear for some of you, but loneliness can be dangerous. And not because being alone is dangerous, but being lonely is it's different. You know, when we're lonely, that attention can feel like love. Validation feels like commitment, right? Potential, it may feel like reality. You see someone's potential, and rather than recognize that it's just potential, that becomes your reality. And you see that and you ignore certain things, right? And that's when we begin accepting things that we would have never accepted if we believed we deserve better. I've seen people stay because they were afraid of sleeping alone. I've seen people stay because they were afraid no one else is going to want them. And maybe because starting over just felt scarier than just staying in the unhealthy, unhappy relationship, you know? So let's talk about people pleasing. Some of us were taught don't make waves, keep everybody happy, don't disappoint anyone. So what happens? You become an expert at protecting everyone else's feelings while you're abandoning your own. What we say is, what we mean, we say yes when we mean no. We stay quiet when something hurts. We apologize for having needs. And eventually, we lose ourselves trying to keep someone else comfortable. Leanne, or red flags, they tell you no one else will want you. Yes, yes, right? It's insane when someone's telling you that and you start to believe it when you're already questioning your own self-worth, right? And once you understand and you know and you believe in your heart you deserve better than this, none of that stuff matters, right? Nicole, they love to gaslight. Yes. So before I go into the next portion, I'm going to stop for a split second. We're going to pay the bills real quick, come right back. So be right back. Men of Warrior 22 isn't just apparel, it's a reminder to keep going when life gets heavy. Visit MW22 shop and check out the latest shirts, hats, mugs, and gear built for the mindset, not just the look. Stronger together, no one stands alone. If you need coffee that actually hits different, this is it. fuel your mind, elevate your day. Go to Ariel Resupply Coffee Company, proud sponsor of the Mental Warrior 22 show. Use MW22 for 20% off. Link is in my bio. Empowering Holistic Health is a proud sponsor of the Mental Warrior 22 show and a proud partner of the Mental Warrior 22 Foundation, helping people focus on wellness from the inside out. From health programs and supplements to apparel designed to support your lifestyle, she is building a community around better health and better living. Visit empoweringholistic.com for more. Hey everybody, this is Lex from Mental Warrior 22, and I want to talk to you about the war inside. The war inside was born from real battles, real struggles, and the truth that many of us spend our lives living in survival mode without even realizing it. This book isn't written about trauma. It's about resilience. It's about confronting the lies that we tell ourselves, breaking free from the weight of our past, and finding the strength to reclaim our lives. If you ever felt like you had to carry the world alone, if you've ever smiled while silently falling apart, then I wrote this for you. The War Inside is a reminder that healing is possible, that hope is real, and no one has to fight alone. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Reading the comments, Misty, anticipating their needs to avoid situations that could get uncomfortable. You know, a few weeks ago, we talked about that emotional intelligence, right? And how a lot of people avoid tough conversations for whatever reason. You know, they try to justify it, but a lot of people aren't prepared for those tough conversations. So let's talk about trauma bonding versus love, right? Intensity isn't always intimacy, right? Just because something feels intense doesn't mean it's love. Some people are mistaken that emotional highs and lows for passion. Breaking up, getting back together, that constant conflict, right? That high school nonsense, right? It was cute maybe when you were in high school, and even that wasn't healthy. But in high school, that was like the norm with a lot of people, right? The break up, get back together, and all that stuff. But like that constant conflict followed by that incredible affection, that cycle can become addictive. And it's not because it's healthy, but because your nervous system is going to get used to that, right? Now it thrives off of that. It needs that. But love shouldn't feel like constantly trying to survive. It shouldn't. So let me ask you, which one of these can you relate to? The fear of being alone, the people pleasing, wanting to fix people, growing up around unhealthy relationships, trying to earn love, or maybe you realize that chaos became your comfort zone. I'd like to know in the comments, please let me know which one of those can you relate to. Maybe it's all of them. You know, maybe you can relate to all of them, from the fear of being alone to the people pleasing, the wanting to fix people, growing up in the unhealthy relationships, trying to earn love. Maybe the chaos became your comfort zone. You know, again, it's easy for myself as a veteran to understand that last part, right? We thrive in the chaos. So that becomes our norm. And it's not just veterans, right? Again, trauma is trauma. We're all going through something. So growing up in that unhealthy environment, seeing what, you know, whether your parents always fought, argued, or there was a revolving door of, you know, new men in her life or new women in his life or whatever, that became your norm. You thought that's what relationships maybe look like. And you adapted those things. So Fear of being alone, people pleasing. Meg, wanting to fix them, chaos for sure. People pleasing, the chaos became my comfort. I think that one, Misty, is probably the one I relate to. The chaos became my comfort, and somewhere in there, all the other ones kind of fall in there. I thrive in the chaos, but I kept wanting to fix people and that fear of being alone. For anyone who knows me, I've said that, I go back to the inner voice in my head, you know, as a kid, 5 years old, having my father tell me, hey, no one will ever love you. You will die alone. I never realized how much that would impact me. I went most of my life that every once in a while that I'll hear that voice when I'm alone. I hear that voice sometimes that you see you're going to be alone. No one will ever love you. So survival tactic from childhood that carried over into a marriage. Realized too late. Now I'm catching myself before I do that to others. Huh? So, once we understand why we ignore these red flags, then maybe the next question becomes, what are the red flags we're making excuses for the most? Not the obvious ones, right? I'm talking about the real subtle ones, the ones we keep dismissing, the ones we rationalize, right? The ones that are slowly chipping away at our confidence until one day you wake up wondering, where did you go? That's where I want to go, what I want to talk about. Jennifer, although after combat the chaos was comfort. Same, same. I thrive in the chaos. It's when it's quiet that took me a long time to adapt to. And I love the peace and quiet now. But it took me a long time to get there. I always wanted something to go wrong so I can jump in and feel like I accomplished something. I helped someone. I fixed something. I did it. Um, so, you know, what's interesting is most red flags, again, they don't look like red flags at the beginning. Sometimes these red flags, it's so tricky, right? Because it looks like hope, like the potential, the chemistry, or maybe something that you think you can handle. And that's why it's easy to dismiss them. So let's let's make a list tonight, right? I want to have this conversation about some of the red flags we explain and why, and what those explanations can cost us. So, red flag number one, inconsistency. I want to start with this one that doesn't get talked about enough. Inconsistency. One day, they're all in. They're all in. The next, they're just distant. They're gone. One day, 1 week, they cannot stop thinking about you, talking to you, like consistently. Then the next week, they disappear. When they're present, they're incredible. But when they're gone, you're wondering what changed. Like, so what do? We start chasing the consistency instead of expecting it. You're chasing the consistency rather than expecting it. We tell ourselves again, they're busy. There's a lot of stress. Things are going to calm down. But here's the problem. Healthy people can have busy seasons. We have busy seasons. I think I am in my most busiest season. Healthy relationships can still survive the stress. But if inconsistency becomes the pattern, then don't ignore the pattern. Stop focusing on the potential. Recognize it for how it is, right? One time, got it, but it's the patterns. Heather, we think we can fix people. Absolutely. Absolutely. We do. You know, understand, people will tell you who they are with their words, but they'll show you with their inconsistencies. So, number two, you're always the one doing the work. I think here's another one. You're the one starting every conversation. Maybe you're the one apologizing. You're the one planning the dates, the one checking in, the one trying to fix every disagreement. Relationships aren't supposed to feel like you're pulling the wagon uphill by yourself, right? This requires effort from both people. Ask yourself, if you stop reaching out today, would this relationship still exist? I asked that same question last week. If I stop doing this, would this relationship still exist? If I stop trying to fix people or help people or save people, because it should be both of you, the two of you. It's not a one person thing. And sometimes the answer to that question will tell you everything you need to know. Number three, red flag number three, you don't feel like yourself anymore. And this one always hits hard because this is the one that happens slowly. Maybe you stop laughing as much, you stop seeing your friends, you stop pursuing your hobbies or speaking your mind. It's almost like you start walking on eggshells and you replay every conversation in your head before you say anything because you're trying not to upset them. And one day you wake up and realize, I don't even recognize myself anymore. If a relationship cost you your identity, it's costing way too much. Way too much. Red flag number four. You keep making excuses or you keep excusing behavior that keeps repeating. Again, patterns. And again, I want to make this clear. Everybody makes mistakes. I've made mistakes. You've made mistakes. Healthy relationships isn't about being perfect. It's about accountability. The issue isn't that someone messed up. The issue is when the same apology is what keeps showing up, but the behavior doesn't change, right? It's just that repeated behavior. And at some point, an apology without change is not accountability. It's just a delay tactic, just trying to string you along and keep you in. So, red flag number five, you don't feel safe being honest. You don't feel safe being honest. Can you disagree without fear? Can you express your feelings without being punished? Can you say, listen, that hurt me, without being told, stop being so damn sensitive? Can you bring up a concern without it somehow becoming your fault? Because if honesty always leads to conflict, then you're going to eventually stop being honest. You're going to keep it inside. And this is where the resentment begins. And I think that the biggest red flag of all is when your intuition keeps whispering something isn't right, but you spend months, sometimes you spend years trying to convince yourself it is. And your intuition, it's not always going to shout at you. Sometimes it's whispering in your ear, right? Sometimes it sounds like, I don't feel safe. I don't feel respected. I don't feel valued. I don't feel seen. Don't ignore that voice just because it isn't loud. Don't. So I also want to create a challenge for you tonight. Meg, I lived in chaos for so long, and when I finally found peace and learned how to be okay in the quiet, now when there's too much going on, I get overstimulated. I feel that. It's finding that healthy balance, right? That happy middle. Misty, I used to chase inconsistencies. Now I find myself pulling back mirroring the silence instead of asking for clarity. So I want to challenge you tonight, because this conversation, again, isn't just about recognizing red flags in other people. It's about recognizing them in ourselves. And, Eli put it best up there, having accountability for the role he played. So I want you to ask yourself, have you ever been inconsistent? Have you ever avoided the difficult conversations? Have you ever failed to communicate? Have you ever expected someone to read your mind? Have you ever shut someone out instead of letting them in? Again, it's about recognizing these things within yourself, right? And I want you to be brutally honest with yourself. You can put it here in the comments if you want. I would love to hear from it. But if not, hey, this is something that I want you to ask yourself tonight, because again, some of us are guilty of that. Hell, I know I'm guilty of that, right? I know that there was so much more I probably could have done, and I could maybe have a million excuses. But at the end of the day, it doesn't take away that I fell short of certain things. Me, the thing that I can control, myself. So I know I failed to communicate, especially when life happens, when there's trauma, right? You're going to feel that way. A lot of times you just shut down because life has taught you that when you speak up, someone will make you feel worse about yourself. So you learn to just, I'm not even going to say anything. It's not even worth it. I already know how this is going to play out, right? Especially when you're with someone for long enough, you already know how they're going to respond. So you just choose not to say anything. And that's sad. And it shouldn't be that way. And again, those are red flags. But growth begins when we're willing to ask what kind of partner, what kind of friend, what kind of parent, what kind of person I am becoming. Because if all we do is point the blame outward, we're never going to grow inward. So, which one of these may have stood out to you? And there's a whole lot more, but maybe some of these stood out to you. Maybe not, and it's not because someone else did it, but because you've experienced it. Or maybe because you've caught yourself doing it. No judgment. I said it already. I know that I'm guilty of a bunch of those. And sometimes it's not intentional. You get so caught up in your own little bubble as well that you don't recognize. It's that autopilot. You don't recognize certain things that you're doing. And if there's no communication from both sides, then you also may not see that you're doing something wrong. And I'm not talking about, some people do it intentionally. But sometimes it's having that tough conversation, because sometimes it is that simple, right? To be like, you know what? Oh, shit. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I was doing this. Let me fix it. How can we fix this? And changing that behavior. But if it doesn't change, then it's just another pattern. It's just an apology without action. So again, I'd love to hear from you guys. This is no judgment. This is what this community is all about, right? We're here to learn. We're here to grow. We're here to become healthier people, not just better at spotting the unhealthy ones. So, tonight we talking about how most of us don't ignore the red flags because we don't see them. We ignore them for, fear, loneliness, hope, or old wounds convince us to explain them away. But there's always a silver lining. Just because you've ignored the red flags before doesn't mean you're destined to keep repeating the same patterns. Healing changes what you tolerate. It changes what you accept, It changes what feels normal. So I want to talk about how we rebuild the trust in ourselves, because that's really what this journey is all about. So people often ask, how do I stop attracting the wrong people? My answer is simple. Honestly, you probably won't. You probably won't. You're going to meet dishonest people, manipulative people. You're going to meet emotionally unavailable people. You're going to meet people who aren't ready to love you the way you deserve to be loved. That's life. The goal is to stop meeting them. It's to stop giving them access to places in your life they haven't earned. Read that again in your mind. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your heart. Not everyone deserves your time or your energy. And that's not bitterness, that's wisdom. That's growing. Because again, you're going to continue to have people that are terrible people, and you recognize the patterns instead of excusing them, explaining them away, and you protect your peace. It's protecting your peace. Mel, not the answer I saw coming. I wish that I could say, oh, you're never going to stop attracting these people. No, but here's the flip side to that. Those people are still going to come around. But when you start protecting your peace and recognizing things, and you start awakening to those signs and feeling better about yourself and understanding your self-worth and what you deserve, then you're going to attract those people as well. And that's the beauty of it. You open yourself up to attract the love you truly deserve. And you're going to have to weed out those bad ones, but you're going to recognize them, right? Sometimes people hear conversations like tonight and you walk away thinking like, I guess I shouldn't trust anyone. No, that's not healing. Healing isn't about becoming suspicious of everyone. It's becoming secure enough to trust yourself. And that's the difference. Because when you trust yourself, you don't ignore what you feel. You don't talk yourself out of your intuition. You don't abandon yourself to keep someone else. So we talk about boundaries. Boundaries, when you hear it, you think it means pushing people away, and it doesn't. Again, boundaries isn't a wall, it's a gate. And a gate opens. A gate welcomes healthy people. And it simply says you don't get unlimited access just because you ask. Trust isn't given all at once. It's built. Respect isn't automatic. It's demonstrated, right? Love isn't proven by how much you're willing to tolerate. It's strengthened by that mutual respect. So, how many people tonight have spent years trying to prove they're worthy of being loved? Trying to earn it, to convince someone to choose you, trying to become enough. Healthy love doesn't require an audition, right? You shouldn't have to convince someone to value you. You shouldn't have to shrink yourself to make someone feel comfortable. You shouldn't have to lose your voice to keep your relationship. If someone only values that version of you that's always silent, that's not acceptance, right? That's control. So before we end tonight, I want you to ask yourself these questions. Not for everyone else, for you. When you're in a relationship, can you be yourself? Can you speak honestly? Can you disagree respectfully? Can you celebrate each other's growth instead of competing with it? Like truly celebrate each other's wins. Can you apologize without keeping score? Can you trust each other without the constant fear? Do you feel peace? Or are you constantly managing anxiety? Those questions matter because sometimes we're so focused on whether someone loves us that we forget to ask whether the relationship is actually healthy. The relationship that determines every other relationship in your life is the one that you have with yourself. If you don't trust yourself, you'll constantly look for someone else to tell you what you deserve. If you don't value yourself, you'll accept whatever someone else is willing to give you. If you don't believe you're worthy, you're going to mistake attention for love. Healing isn't just about learning how to choose better people, right? It's about becoming the kind of person that no longer settles for less than what you deserve. Remember, deserve doesn't mean perfect. None of us are perfect, but every relationship is going to have the disagreements. It's going to require grace. Every relationship is going to have moments where you need patience. The difference is that the healthy relationships work through these problems together. Unhealthy relationships makes one person carry all the weight while the other one carries the excuses. So here's my challenge for the week. I want you to spend the next 7 days looking for red flags. And I don't want you to spend it looking for the red flags in everyone else. I want you to pay attention to yourself. Notice what your gut is telling you about something. Notice when people are making excuses for behavior that doesn't sit right, when you're abandoning your own needs just to keep the peace. Also notice when you're showing up in a way that needs growth. Are you communicating clearly? Are you listening? Are you respecting boundaries? Are you being honest? Because healing, again, isn't about being perfect. It's about becoming aware. And awareness is going to lead to change, and the change is going to lead to freedom. So, once again, I appreciate every single one of you for being here, for being vulnerable, for opening up, for sharing your Wednesday night with me. Thank you for sharing your stories, your experiences, and your hearts in the comments tonight. That's what makes this community different. We don't come here to pretend we've got it all figured out. We don't. We come here to learn from one another and remind each other that healing is possible. So if tonight's conversation spoke to you, I'd ask you to do two things. First, share this episode, please. You never know who needs to hear this conversation. Second, don't just walk away inspired. I want you to pick one thing from tonight and put it into practice this week. Healing happens through action, not just the information. And some of this may apply to you, some of it may not, but these are tools for the toolbox. It will either help you or a loved one, someone you know who might be going through this. So I want you to remember this. The goal isn't to become better at spotting the red flags in other people. The goal is to become so healthy that you no longer need or you no longer feel the need to explain them away. In the comments, even after the show, again, listen. Take a look at what others wrote in there. Support each other. Lift each other up. In here, we have some amazing people. Share this. Let's keep this community growing. Let's keep this growing. Let's keep this going. And let's continue to have these conversations. And next week, we got one more July relationship episode before we jump into the August segment, which is National Wellness Month. So thank you once again for tuning in. For those of you who are constantly tuning in and sharing, I appreciate you guys. I am learning just as much from you guys sharing your stories. It truly is inspiring. So I thank you guys genuinely from the bottom of my heart. I am Alex Bonilla. This is Mental Warrior 22 show. And as always, let me remind you to keep fighting, keep healing. And remember, we're stronger together. You don't have to do it alone. No one stands alone. Until next week, you take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And be a warrior for someone else today. You guys have a great night.